Hello and good day. Our topic for today is portfolio management. In this video, I'm going to discuss the definition of portfolio, the composition of portfolio, and the functions of portfolio management. First, let's define portfolio. I'm sure that you have already heard the word portfolio. Portfolio is defined as a planned selection of securities put together to achieve specific purposes of the owner. In other words, when we say portfolio, this is a collection of securities or combination of securities. Of course, there are many kinds and examples of securities, and when these securities are selected and eventually combined, they are collectively known as portfolio. To be most effective, the portfolio should be tailored to the investment goals of the person concerned. Meaning to say, the securities that are selected and put together must be in line with the goals of the investor. Each security in the portfolio has a definite contribution towards satisfying the investor's requirements. Since this is a collection or combination of securities, expect that each security or every security is important in satisfying the goals of the investors. One of the purposes of selecting the securities and putting together the securities is to satisfy the investors' requirements. There are four investors' requirements, and they are first, safety, second, current income, third, growth of capital, and fourth, liquidity. The first investor's requirement is safety. Of course, nobody wants to lose his or her money. Nobody wants to lose his or her resources, especially financial resources. That's why some people are more risk averse than others. When we say risk averse, this means disinclined or reluctant to take risks. That's why when we say risk averse investors, these are investors who do not go for risky investments. Safety of principal for them is a prime consideration in choosing investments. In other words, they are not aiming for high return, but the safeguarding of the principal. No matter what happens, they prioritize the safety of their principal. Another investor's requirement is current income. Some people, especially retired individuals, require a constant stream of income from their investments because they need it for living expenses. Current income is an income that a person generates in the current period, or this is an income that an investor generates in the current period. There are instances when the pensions and other retirement benefits of retired individuals are not enough to cover their living expenses or financial needs. That's why they go for investments. They invest their resources in order for them to generate current income. Other people are also in need of current income. Sometimes the salaries of employed individuals or employees are not enough to cover their living expenses. That's why they're also looking for ways in order for them to generate a short-term income or current income. Especially if these employed individuals or employees have family. If these employed individuals or employees have family, then their living expenses go up. And when their living expenses go up, they are more in need of current income. Aside from safety and current income, another investor's requirement is growth of capital. Some investors do not really need current income and are more interested in maximizing the returns on their investments so that they have a better chance to achieve their long-term financial goals, such as augmenting retirement income or sending their children to college. Growth of capital means capital appreciation. There should be an increase in capital in the long run. Investors who are aiming for growth of capital must look for investments that will give them high return. Of course, the investments that will give high return are investments that are risky. Recall the trade-off between risk and return. The higher the risk, the higher the return. So if an investor aims for growth of capital, they want to increase their capital in the long run, then they have to invest in risky investments. And these risky investments will provide them high return. Aside from safety, current income, and growth of capital, one of the investor's requirements is liquidity. Some investors want or need to be able to readily convert some of their investments into cash, so they invest a portion of their portfolio in securities that are liquid or marketable. Recall that an investment is said to be liquid if the investment is easily or readily convertible into cash. The investment can easily be converted into cash. These investors who are aiming for liquidity are investors who are in need of cash most of the time. The reason why they invest in liquid investments is that whenever they need cash, they can easily convert their investments into cash. Let's now proceed to the functions of portfolio management. Before I provide the four principal functions of portfolio management, it is important that you know the role of a certified securities representative. A certified securities representative is the one expected to help clients choose from the many securities available that are best suited to their individual needs and investment objectives. In other words, the certified securities representative is the person who will help the investor select the right securities that the investor will put together in his portfolio. Of course, the securities that must be selected must be in line with the individual needs and objectives of the investors. When one attempts to meet investment needs by selecting securities for a portfolio, he is engaging in portfolio management. The four principal functions of portfolio management are: first, establishing the plan for the portfolio; second, selection of securities; third, buying and selling of securities; and fourth, continuing supervision of the securities purchased. So the first principal function of portfolio management is establishing the plan for the portfolio. Ang ibig sabihin nito, mag-establish tayo or magsiset ng plan. Actually, hindi lang plan but also policy statement incorporating the client's investment objectives and constraints. Palagi naman, lalo na kapag process, ang nauuna ay establishment of the plan, setting the plan or development of the plan. Another function of portfolio management is selection of securities. Ang ibig sabihin nito, isa-select natin yung securities na kailangang bilhin ng investor. So this entails the analysis and selection of securities to be purchased in accordance with the investment plan. Actually, hindi lang isa-select, but rather kailangan ding i-analyze yung securities na bibilhin ng investor. Next, buying and selling of securities. This includes the actual buying and selling of securities as required to keep the portfolio to be effective in fulfilling the investment objectives of the investor. And the last function of portfolio management is the continuing supervision of the securities purchased. Meaning to say, there should be a periodic appraisal of the securities held in the portfolio. So, supervision is also a major concern in portfolio management. Portfolio management does not end with buying and selling of securities. After buying and selling of securities, there must be a continuing supervision of the securities purchased in order to assure the effectiveness of the portfolio or the securities in the portfolio in fulfilling the investment objectives of the investor. Next, analyzing the individual investors. No two individuals have exactly the same goals, risk tolerance, financial resources, and personal circumstances. Of course, investors are different when it comes to their goals. And aside from the difference in their goals, they also differ in risk tolerance, meaning to say, they are different in the assumption of risks. Other investors are conservative, other investors are moderate, and other investors are aggressive. When it comes to financial resources, other investors' financial resources are sufficient or enough, while other investors' financial resources are only limited. Aside from the difference in goals, risk tolerance, and financial resources, they also differ in personal circumstances. That's why it is therefore necessary to find out the basic information about the client so that an investment plan can be developed to suit his unique requirements. Meaning to say, the basic information of the investor can be used by the certified securities representative in order for him to select the right securities for the portfolio of the investor. That means the better way to analyze the individual investors is to know their basic information. Let me give you examples. For example, the investor has dependents. Meron siyang anak na binubuhay or meron siyang mga anak na binubuhay. So the investor who has other persons dependent upon him must provide for such things as a home, life and sickness insurance, and the education of the dependents. Aside from dependents, age should also be considered. Kailangan ding i-consider yung age ng investor. Of course, mayroong investors na bata at mayroon ding investors na matanda. Younger investors can afford to assume more risks and develop long-range plans. While older investors are usually more dependent upon investment income and are therefore more conservative. Of course, kailangan ding i-consider yung financial resources ng investors. There are big investors and there are small investors. Of course, those big investors have sufficient or enough resources, while small investors have limited financial resources. Persons with substantial amounts of capital can afford to assume certain investment risks that are otherwise unacceptable to small investors. Kaya kailangan din na i-consider yung financial resources ng investor. Next, another information about the client or investor that should be considered is the income of investor. Of course, the higher the income of the investor, the more he is capable of investing. And of course, the lower the income of the investor, the less he is capable of investing. Most fixed income earners have some form of pension to look forward to upon their retirement. Maaring hindi sapat yung pension nila kung nag-retire na sila to cover up their expenses or their living expenses, but at least they have an assured source of income. Yung mga self-employed individuals naman, kailangan na nilang mag-set aside ng kanilang funds habang nagtatrabaho pa sila in order for them to prepare for their retirement. The certified securities representative should also consider the ability of the client or the ability of the investor to supervise investments. Of course, most investors do not have the time, knowledge, or capability to supervise their investments. So the certified securities representative must therefore be prepared to assist investors in making decisions necessary for the maintenance of an effective portfolio. So napakahalaga na malaman ng certified securities representative yung abilidad ng isang kliyente or investor na isupervise ang kanyang investments. So those are just some examples of information about the client or investor that a certified securities representative should know in order for him to select the securities that are best and appropriate for the investor. Of course, marami pang information na kailangan ang certified securities representative para ma-select niya yung investment or securities na talagang appropriate for the investor. It is not limited to the examples that I have given. Again, in analyzing the individual investors, it is necessary to find out the basic information and, of course, other relevant information about the client or the investor. By analyzing the individual investors, the certified securities representative can develop an investment plan that suits the investment requirements of the investor.